Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our summer series of Pirkei Avot. As many of you likely know, I really enjoy learning Pirkei Avot, teaching Pirkei Avot, discussing Pirkei Avot. It's something that it's probably one of the works that we've gone through quite a bit. I mean, one of the most. And now in the summertime, there's a tradition that we learn Pirkei Avot during the summer. And in my family, we have the tradition that Shabbat afternoon we sit around with our children and we go around and we read the chapter of that week, which is very, very special. It's a very special tradition. We've been doing it for the past few years. And the reason that we do this in the summer is because the summertime is a time of um, of leisure. It's also a time of pleasure. It can also be a time of indulgence. It could be a time that we lose some of the boundaries that we otherwise have in place of modesty and of the type of conduct that we want to see. So, in order not to lose our modesty, in order not to lose our sense of purpose, our sense of shame, our sense of deeper ethical and moral values as we enjoy summer. So one of the things we do is we study Pirkei Avot. If you hadn't yet made the blessing on the Torah, it's always nice to. It's not only nice; it's important to make the blessing of Torah before we study Torah each day. So if you have not made the blessing, we'll say it together. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim. ונתן לנו את תורתו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה. And let's get right to it. So this year we're going to focus on chapter 3. Now, every year I try to focus on a different section, and this year took me to chapter 3. And Akavya ben Mahalalel. Tonight we're going to focus on the very first Mishnah of this chapter. So, Sue, maybe I'll ask you to read it.
Okay, now we don't have books, but you're talking about from
today.
screen.
Yeah. If you have a Siddur, it's also in the Siddur. If you have Pirkei Avot, but if not, we'll just read it. Well, we'll read it from the screen. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Akavya, the son of Mahalalel, would say, reflect upon 3 things, and you will not come to the hands of transgression. Know from where you came, where you are going, and before whom you are destined to give a judgment and accounting. From where you came, from a putrid drop, where you are going, to a place of dust, maggots and worms, and before whom you are destined to give a judgment and accounting, before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sue. So, Akavya ben Mahalalel. Have you ever heard of Akavya? No, you likely haven't heard of Akavya. And let me tell you why. It's a very interesting story. The story goes back about 2,200 years. So we're talking about 100 years or so before the Common Era. And that places us, again, over 100 years prior to the destruction of the Second Temple. And at that time, there are 2 great scholars that we know of. Their name is Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shatach. One of them is the Nasi, the leader of the Jewish people, and one of them is the Av Bedin, the chief justice of the Jewish people. And the Nasi is more the outward-facing leader of the Jewish people. He also is on top of the Sanhedrin as well, but also interfaces outwards. And the Av Bedin is the head of the court, and perhaps, in a sense, faces more inwards and runs the Jewish courts. And they have, one of their students is Akavya ben Mahalalel. Akavya is one of the great scholars of his time, to the degree his scholarliness, his piety are so great that the Mishnah elsewhere records that there was nobody ever greater in the temple than Akavya. When all the Jews would gather in the temple, the greatest one there was Akavya. Well, how come I never heard of him? Well, he had two contemporaries known as Shmaya and Avtalyon. And those contemporaries, Shmaya and Avtalyon, become the dual pair of leadership during his time, at the time of the passing of his teachers and his masters. And they are famous because they are the teachers of the great Hillel. Now, you've all heard of Hillel. Hillel is perhaps much of the Mishnah could be called the teachings of Hillel and Shammai, the debates of Hillel and Shammai. Well, Hillel is a student of Shmaya and Avtalyon. And Akavya is a contemporary of theirs. Akavya teaches, and in four matters, we can call them somewhat obscure halachot, not very common halachot. Akavya is actually teaching different than the majority opinion. His teachers and his tradition, the way that he was taught, the way that he understood, is a little bit different than what the majority opinion is. And the halachot are somewhat obscure. I'll give you an example of one of the halachot. One halachot is, if a person is in the leprosy, in the tzarat, there is a rule that within the leprosy area, if a hair turns white, that kind of is a sign of leprosy. And they have this debate of, well, you have a leprosy and the hair inside the area turns white and the leprosy goes away and a new sign of leprosy comes, tzarat, and the white hair is still there. Does the original white hair a sign of contamination on this new lesion? Understand that this is a highly obscure, uncommon halacha. But he taught different than the majority because his teachers taught it to him a little differently. And four such halachot. Well, one day the Talmud says, that's recorded in the Mishnah, they come to Akavya and they say, Akavya, chazor b'cha. Change your mind. Teach it a little differently, and we will appoint you as the Av Bet Din. You will become the chief justice, but you need to embrace the majority opinion. You need to embrace the majority opinion. And Akavya turns to them and he says, I would rather be called a shote kol yamai. He says, let me be called a fool for the rest of my life. Let me go into obscurity. I would rather not be known. I would rather that in 22, in the year 2025, they're going to be sitting in Portland. People are going to be like, who's this Akavya? Never heard of him. Let me go into obscurity and let me be called a fool. But I don't want to, for a moment, lend credence and make it appear as if I'm changing my opinion because I want to accept a position of power. So he turns down the power. In a sense, he goes into obscurity in a sense. We don't know a lot about him. We know very few teachings of his, and this is one. And because of his moral clarity, that he will not make it appear that he changes his opinion in order to take a position of power. Beautiful, beautiful story. But the story gets even better. As Akavya is about to die, He's passing. His son is next to him. And he tells his son, he says, after I pass, I want you to learn and to teach the majority opinion. So turns to his father, son turns to his father, he says, your whole life, you stood strong, you would never change your mind. And here you're telling me that I should follow the majority? So Akavya tells his son, he says, you have to understand. You have to have integrity, and I have to have integrity. For me, my teachers taught it to me this way. And when they taught me the halacha the way I understood it, it was a raging debate. And at that time, the jury was still out. The jury was still out. And thus, it was not clear who's the majority, who is the minority. And so for me, I remained in the minority. But he says, my son, in your times, the jury's not out anymore. Now the halacha has been clearly established like the majority. And the integrity and the appropriate halacha for you and the appropriate manner of halacha is to follow the majority. So you don't toe my line. You don't do it because this is how the Ben Mahalalel family would do it. Because your father died an unknown soldier, because this was his legacy. That was my integrity. Your integrity is to follow the majority as it's taught in your time. And in your time, the majority is different, and I am in the minority. So after I die, you learn, you study, you teach like the majority. Very powerful story. But it gets even better. Akavya's son turns to him and he says, Father, he says, can you please instruct your colleagues and tell them that they should accept me in their inner circle. Introduce me. Tell them I'm your son. They should let me in. Tell them that I'm a man with integrity. And his father says, no, I will not do that. And in a sense, his parting words to his son are very powerful words. He says, Ma'asecha yekaravucha, u'ma'asecha yirachakucha. Your deeds, your actions will draw you near, and your actions will make you will distance you. You're in the academy of Torah, in the academy of Judaism. There is integrity. It's not about connections. Who do you know? Who was your father? Your deeds are going to be what you're going to be judged by. So we're talking tonight about a man of great moral integrity, of incredible clarity, who is willing to lose his name in his fame, in a sense, and put that all on the side. Let it not be said. Let it not be said that people change their opinions, change their positions simply because of the opportunity to rise to the top. A man who yet, with that integrity, tells his son, but my integrity is not your integrity, and further instructs his son, and his final words to his son is, your deeds will be how you're judged. You're not going to be judged because you are Ben Mahalalel's son. You're from the Akavya family. We're learning tonight about an incredible, incredible man, Akavya ben Mahalalel, who's in this first century prior to the Common Era. So what does Akavya tell us? Let's go back. What does Akavya tell us? Elizabeth, do you want to read again just the beginning of the Mishnah? You're muted.
Thank you. Akavya, the son of Mahalalel, would say, reflect upon three things, and you will not come to the hands of transgression.
So just a moment, let's stop for a moment, stop over there. And let's note something. Akavya doesn't say, he says, reflect on three things, and you will not come to the hands of transgression. What are the hands of transgression?
So
you won't transgress.
You know, what's interesting is that, I mean, I'm using it out of the Art Scroll Siddur right now, and they translate it as come into the grip of sin, right?
Good, the grip.
Grip, right? So like you won't be grabbed by sin.
Beautiful, beautiful. The hands of transgression. We're not talking about don't transgress. You see, you have to understand something. You see behind me, we have an entire set of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the very tight, but it's the miracle work of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, written around the year 150, and it encapsulates all of the oral tradition. And it's this is what I call the suitcase of Jewish thought. When the Jewish people were going to be dispersed, and they were being dispersed, when there were Jews in India and Jews going to Turkey, there were Jews going to North Africa and Jews going to Persia. And he knew, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi knew that we got to hold them together somehow. We got to not just hold them together, but we have to make a suitcase of the tradition so that that as they go to Cyprus, to India, to North Africa, to Persia, to Iraq, to Iran. So as the Jewish people travel, they'll have something, they'll have a suitcase with which they'll be able to hold the oral tradition with them. They'll have to hold the thousands of years of Jewish scholarship. That until now, one had to come to the academy. One had to live and one had to be close by and nearby and be a part of the academy. But now we're going to have Jews all over the world. There's going to be communities that are going to spring up everywhere, and they're going to be distant from each other. How are they going to have the thousands of years in tradition of tradition of the scholarship, of the oral tradition, of the oral Torah, of the Torah that God instructed to Moshe orally, of the halachot that were developed over all those thousands of years? So he makes a very tight text called the Mishnah. And in the Mishnah, there are 60 tractates. 59 of them deal with halacha. 59 of them deal with law. And there's one that deals with ethics. There's one that deals with what we call beyond the letter of the law. There's one that's not the law itself, but that's what we call lifni mishurat hadin, beyond the line of the law. And that's, of course, which tractate?
Pirkei Avot.
Pirkei Avot. So you want to know how not to sin? 59 tractates tell you the law. 59 tractates tell you the law. Here we're talking about something else. We're not talking about not to sin. Here we're talking about something else. You ever went to the New York subway? You ever took a subway in New York? Well, you're in the train, it's busy, there's the hustle and bustle, people coming, going. Now, but if you ever, you stand on the platform, there's the line where the subway pulls up. No one stands at the line. You have to be a fool to stand at the line. Where do you stand? You stand behind the yellow line. There's a big yellow stripe. Maybe it's 2.5, 3 feet. And you stand behind the yellow line. Because we don't, if we stand at the line, God forbid, tumult, hustle, bustle, movement, too much happening, you got to be a fool to stand at the line. So you stand behind the line. You stand behind the yellow line, behind that big. Well, That's what Pirkei Avot is about. We're talking about how do we get behind the yellow line. So Akavya ben Mahalalel, he doesn't say, well, you're not going to sin. He says, avera. You're not going to come to the grip of sin, like you've translated. You won't come to the hands of transgression. You're not going to come to the hands of transgression. Wonderful. So we're talking about how do we get behind the line, behind the double line? How do we get behind it? So says Akavya. Bashi, you want to read? Want to read, Bashi, where it says, know from where you came?
Know from where you came, where you are going, and before whom you are destined to give a judgment and accounting. From where you came, from a putrid drop, where you were going, to a place of dust, maggots, and worms, and before whom you are destined to give a judgment and accounting, before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He.
Wonderful. So here, this is his advice. How do you get behind the caution line? How do you not even get to the grip of sin, the grip of transgression, the grip of immorality, the grip of bad decisions? Well, how do we do that? So he says, know from where you came, where you're going, and before whom you are destined to give a judgment and account. From where you came, from a putrid drop, where are you going? To a place of dust, maggots, and worms, and before whom are you destined to give a judgment and accounting? Before the Supreme King of Kings, Holy One, blessed be He. What does this mean? How does this keep us away from even from the caution line? What is the advice over here? What is the advice?
I think it's maintain a spirit of humility.
Beautiful. Humility. What else? Elizabeth, you're muted, yes.
Sorry, my AC has been noisy lately, so I think to build on the concept of humility, it's also to remember that we're not in charge, right? That we are here because Hashem wanted us to be here, and we will be going back to account for our lives in front of Hashem at the end. And so at all times we are answerable to Hashem. And so we should remember that. And I think it's analogous to humility, but it's a very specific kind of humility.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. Understand that there's accountability. Understand that we are not in charge. We are guests over here. We're guests of this planet. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, let's think about this for a minute. We're talking about how to stay out of the grip of sin. It's how to stay out of the zone of sin. Why do people sin? Why do people sin? What motivates sin? What brings about sin? What leads to sin? What leads to sin?
A desire for something one is not supposed to have.
Lust,
Yeah.
pleasure seeking. Yeah. What else?
Laziness.
Laziness. Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason that the Catholics have the 7 deadly sins, right? Right? Lust, greed, laziness, all those kinds of things, right? Gluttony. All those things are the things that lead to us sinning.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, there is like you mentioned, there's lust, desire, pleasure seeking. Akavya ben Mahalalel brings it down to 3. He says, number one, pride. There's nothing more foolish than your pride. There's a great song that the Jewish singer's name is Mordechai ben David. And he has a song, my kids know that I love it. It's a song of father telling his children the rules of life. And it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. He says, the chorus, and it finishes off, he says, there's nothing more foolish than your pride. That's the final rule. There's nothing more foolish than your pride. Pride is number one. And Akavya says, that you want to know what motivates people to sin, what motivates people to lose their sense of moral clarity, what motivates people and how people lose their dignity, lose their ethics, lose their morality. He says, number one is pride. Pride. A person who seeks pride has no boundaries. Unfortunately, we see this now in the world. The world is I would say it's on the brink of destruction, God forbid to say, but there are those who are set to literally destroy the lives of millions and millions of people. And the motivation is what? Simply pride. They can't say they were wrong. They can't say they were mistaken. They can't say that they invaded and they sent, missiles to or whatever it is inappropriately. They can't say that the strategy was wrong. And millions and millions of people around the globe in many countries and in many different societies are starving, are in danger, don't have their basic needs met simply because of the pride and ego of a few men. It's just how it is. Now, so the chief offender, and if you want to stay away from the grip of sin, stay away from pride. So says Akavya Mahalalel, the first thing is, you have to know, me'ayin basa, from where do you come? And he says, from where do you come? From where do you come? Mitipa srucha, from a putrid drop. From a putrid drop. You can't be all that great. Ultimately, how much greater can you be than anybody else? How much more, significant can you be than the fellow next to you? How much more important can you be? You all came from these stinking drops. That's where you came. Lose your sense of pride. Remember that ultimately you're as great as you think that you are. You really cannot be all that great and all that significant. Can't be all that great and all that significant. Right? You come from a putrid drop. Isn't it? It's a great story of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov had a student who was traveling, and the Baal Shem Tov told him before his travels, he says, review the Mishnah of Akavya. Don't forget to review the Mishnah of Akavya. Okay. So he doesn't know why he receives this instruction, but he does. And of course, it's on his mind. The student comes to a town and is spending Shabbat over there. And in this town, there are those who are quite antagonistic to the Baal Shem Tov and to and to Chassidut and to the teachings that he is teaching. And some of the young firebrands, they say, well, we are going to show this fellow that he has no idea what he's talking about. We're going to stump him with a question. We're going to make him look stupid in front of everybody. And we're going to prove our point that the Hasidim and the Baal Shem Tov's followers are just a bunch of crazies. So they come to him and Shabbat, and he's giving a class. In the middle of the class, they raise their hand and they say, well, we have a question. Something's been troubling us. What's been troubling you? He says, well, we study Medrash. And there's a Medrash that says that Adam saw two. Adam saw two. And had he seen three, he would have not sinned. Well, what does this Medrash mean? And the student pauses for a moment, and he remembers that the Baal Shem Tov told him, he said, review the Mishnah of Akavya. And he thinks to himself the 3 points in our Mishnah. And he responds and he said, Adam saw two, but didn't see three. He says, you have to understand. There are the three stools of sin that Akavya says in our Mishnah. The first is, he says, or let's start from the last. He says, the last is to recognize that there is an accounting. Well, he says, Adam knew that there was an accounting. Adam was in communication with Hashem. No one had such clarity and communication like Adam did. Adam was surely aware that there was an accounting. The second point of the Mishnah, the middle point, is to think about the fact that all of life's pleasures, all of this world's pleasures are simply, ultimately, they end up becoming food for the worms. He said, Adam probably understood the ecosystem. He probably understood that all of life's pleasures simply create more food for the worms. He understood that. But the first is that a person's supposed to be humble, and a person's supposed to remember from where they came, and supposed to realize that you simply came from a putrid drop. He said, well, there Adam had a problem. Because where did Adam come from? He didn't come from a stinking drop. Adam was created by the handiwork of Hashem himself. And Adam actually becomes prideful of that. He actually recognizes, he realizes that he is the king of creation. He is the crown of creation. All of the creation is made by Hashem and designed by Hashem's words. But Adam, it says, Hashem actually doesn't just speak him into being, but actually blows a nostril, blows from the depth of himself, fashions him out of clay, is deeply involved in his creation. Well, Adam didn't feel that sense of humility. Adam felt pride. And it was that sense of pride that allowed him to sin. Indeed, in the Torah, there are big letters, small letters, and most of the Torah are common sized letters, regular letters. Right? We had fonts. We'd probably say most of the Torah is like a 16, I think, or 14, something like that, or maybe a 14, 15. And the smaller letters, are maybe an 8, and the bigger ones are what? An 8, I don't know, an 18 or something, maybe a little bigger. Well, in the Torah and throughout Tanakh, every letter is at least one time large, one time small. Where in the Torah is there a small aleph? Do you remember? Where in the Torah is there a small aleph? Where is it?
What was it?
Vayikra, right? Vayikra in the book of Leviticus, the first opening words of the book of Leviticus. The entire temple, the home for Hashem is built, and Hashem calls Moshe into the home, singles out Moshe, endearingly calls Moshe to communicate with Moshe in the new Mishkan. Vayikra el Moshe, but there's a small aleph there. Because though Moshe is singled out for this communication, though Moshe has this endearing and close relationship with Hashem, yet Moshe remains exceedingly humble. Exceedingly humble. Small aleph. Well, where's the large aleph in the Tanakh? The large aleph is in a book known as Divrei Hayamim, Chronicles, where chronicles all of history from the time of Adam all the way through to the time of the destruction of the temple. And there in the aleph, in the book of Chronicles, opens up with the word Adam, and there's a big aleph over there. And why is there a big aleph? Because Adam was aware of his bigness. Adam was aware of his greatness. He was aware of his uniqueness. He was aware that he was the only person ever to have been created by Hashem himself. But he feels it. He senses it. It clouds his sense of humility. He feels that he has a superpower, which he does. But that allows him to make a mistake. That allows him to make a mistake. So the Baal Shem Tov told the student, and the student explains, and he says, if Adam saw 2 and he sinned, because the 3 stools, the 3 legs of the stool, what allows a person to come to the grip of sin, and what keeps a person away, kind of the 3 fences to keep a person away from sin, is keep away from pride, keep away from lust, and keep away from and don't ever forget that there is an accountability. That this is not it. It's not just what's here. What you have is what you get. And what's here. What's the here and now is all that there is. Understand that there's a long picture. So the first point that Akavya says is know from where you came, from a putrid drop. Be humble. Be humble. be humble. What's his second point? The second point is, where are you going? Where are you going? To a place of dust, maggots, and worms. What is he saying? What is he saying? Help me out. What is he saying over here?
Back to the earth.
Yeah. He's saying that the person goes back to earth, of course. And he's saying that all of life's pleasures are simply just create more food for the worms. All of life's pleasures, all of our indulgence, just remember, all of our indulgence simply, they simply turn into decay. You know, I heard a great story from Jordan Schnitzer. And I once brought a group of young entrepreneurs, and we called it Lunch with a Leader. We had lunch with different leaders, and they were giving us their kind of stories and advice. And told the story, he said that his father, great Harold Schnitzer of blessed memory, one of Portland's leading philanthropists, who was involved both in Jewish life and civic life. So he told Jordan, he told him, have you ever seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul? Have you ever seen a hearse towing a U-Haul? Never seen. You can't take it with you. And Jordan said that he remembers it was the night that his father died, and his father died at home. And they called the funeral home, and they came and they picked up his dad in a hearse, and they carried him out, and they took him, and as they're pulling off, he's watching his father be escorted out of his home, and he thinks to himself, have you ever seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul? Can't take it with you. And what's on you simply becomes food for the worms. So Akavya says, lust, desire, the drives, the drives of the physical world, keep them at bay. Just remember, just remind yourself that it just all turns into decay. That's all it is. They can't be that important. That's the second passion. Passion is the second offender. Pride is the first offender. Passion is the second offender. And the third offender is equally as significant. And what's the third offender? The third offender is, it doesn't even make a difference. Nothing matters. I don't matter. My decisions don't matter. What I do doesn't matter. This world really doesn't matter. Nothing matters. That's the third offender. And so to them, Akavya says, think to yourself, it does matter. There's accountability. It makes a difference. There is a story. You're part of something significant. So before who are you destined to give a judgment and accounting? Before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be. So how do you not come to sin? How do you stay out of the grip of sin? What are the offenders? The offenders are pride, passion, lust, and doesn't make a difference. Despondency, in a sense, or just what we call in Hebrew apikoros, which comes from the word epicurus, who taught that all there is what you have right now, right? Today is the only day you have. Well, these are the great offenders. All right, well, let me ask you a question here. We have a very, like I shared with you before, the Mishnah is a very tight text. It's a very tight text. It's a suitcase. It's very, very compact. But there's a redundancy in this Mishnah. There's a redundancy. Let's read this again one more time. Akavya, the son of Mahalalel, would say, reflect upon three things and you will not come to the hands of transgression. Know from where you came, where you are going, and before whom you are destined to give an accounting, judgment and accounting. From where you came, from a putrid drop, where you're going, the place of dust, maggots, and worms, before whom you're destined. It's a redundancy. For a Mishnah, that the text is so tight, that space is at such a premium. Why is there this redundancy? Just say, reflect upon three things, and you'll know, and you will not come to the hand of the transgression. Just say from where you came, from a putrid drop, where you're going, the place of dust, maggots and worms, before whom you're destined to give a judgment accounting before the Supreme King of Kings, Holy One, blessed be. Why the redundancy? Know from where you came, where you're going, before you're destined to give a judgment, and then again, just this is where you came. From where you came. I'll tell you a story about redundancy for a second. This allowed me. There was a woman calls the local newspaper, and she says, she talks to the, she says, I want there to be an obituary about my husband. So the editor says, she says, let me, put you through to the obituaries. The fellow picks up. He says, yeah. She says, oh, my husband, he was a salesman of the highest regard. He was a man with incredible integrity. He used to travel and he opened new frontiers for his company. He was a person that was likable and affable. Anyhow, so the fellow's, clicking, the typewriter is clicking, but then the fellow just says, he says, ma'am, he says, that that for our obituaries, there's a per word charge. You charge per word. So she says, you charge per word? She says, I had no idea. She says, okay. So just put in Lifshitz dead. So the editor says, well, there's a 5-word minimum. She says, okay. Put in Lifshitz dead, car for sale.
Oh,
Anyhow. But when space is at a premium, so you're very tight. So here we're talking about, this is a text that, this isn't like today where we can generate space. This is a text that had to be studied by heart. That when the Mishnah, remember, for years it was studied by heart. This is 1,500 years before there's a printing press. It has to be copied over by hand if we're going to copy it. So why the redundancy? Why the redundancy?
to make it easier to remember.
Okay. Perhaps it flows better. There's a certain flow, there's a certain rhythm. Okay. There is a truth to that idea that in the Mishnah, there's a rhythm to the Mishnah, so that but there's
We see this in Torah all the time, right? We see things repeated in Torah all the time.
Yeah.
And we're taught, and I'm not going to get this quite right, we're taught that Hashem does it for us because context matters. So we learn different things from it in the different context. And because some things are so important that we have to hear them twice. And this seems to me so fundamental that, and also you could make an argument that if you just use the graphic imagery of a putrid drop, a place of dust, maggots, and worms, whatever, the people would get sort of distracted by that. But you need the parallelism to keep people focused that you're answering a question. You're not just putting it there for graphic imagery. You're answering a question that was asked, and a reminder. So I think those are the things that I would think about there.
Yeah. So there's definitely a art to the Mishnah that's expressed, and there's a rhythm and a poetry that exists in the Mishnah, in all Mishnah and in this Mishnah as well. And here's another explanation. There's many explanations to this question, but here's another one. Perhaps, and more than perhaps, some of the great scholars offer this, and they say that Akavya is talking to people on two levels. On two levels. The first person, he says, know from where you came to where you're going and before whom you are giving a accounting. He's talking to us on our soul level, on our great level, on the great person. He's talking to the soul. From where have you come? Where has the soul come from? Where has the soul come from? And to the soul is a spark of Hashem himself. As a matter of fact, he uses the words, Da, you should know, me'ayin basa. From where have you come? But that word me'ayin can also mean from nothingness. From me'ayin, from the beyond. In the works of Kabbalah, our world and the creation is called yesh. It is existence, which comes me'ayin, from nothingness, from the beyond. Da, you should know, we talk to the soul and we say, me'ayin basa. You come from the beyond. Know from where you came. Know the greatness that exists in you. Know that you have a soul, a spark of the divine that exists in you. Know that within you is the story of the Jewish people, is the spark of Hashem, is the miracle that exists in this world. That's all inside of you. Know me'ayin basa. You want to not come to sin. Know that you are a noble. Know that you are a great. Ula'on ata hoylech. And to where are you going? La'on could also mean like to the beyond. You're going to the beyond. You come from before time and you're going to beyond time. Ula'on, know to the soul we say, know how great you are, know how significant you are. Know yourself. Where are you going? Where are you coming from? V'lifnei mi. And to who do you matter? To whom do you matter? Know your greatness, know your significance, know your story. You know, my daughter is now in Israel. She's in Safat, and her cousin Chaim Mishalavim. And, you know, they were supposed to be on a plane right now. They were supposed to be on a plane back home. After a year of being there in seminary, they started their year and they spent days and nights in and out of the shelters. They were they're in the north and near Hezbollah's rockets, and they spent many weeks in the beginning of the year in the shelters. And then for a while things kind of calmed down a little bit, and now just last Thursday, Baruch Hashem, Hashem has performed many miracles, and it's really done incredible things and given the Jewish people and the soldiers of the Israeli Defense Force incredible success at making the world at large a safer world and a greater world and a more peaceful world. As that happens, though, of course, the airports are shut, and they are fortunately have to go into shelters, and from the as many ballistic missiles that are intercepted are those that are landing, and sadly, tragically, there are those that are taking the lives of the good people of Israel. So now, the past week, it's been like they barely sleeping, and they don't know when they're coming back. And not only that, because their dormitory is in a apartment building, they share the shelters with families and children who are very stressed and anxious, mothers who have to come and have to move their children in the middle of the night. They don't have they don't have a home. They're in apartment buildings. They have to go upstairs and downstairs and running, and oftentimes it's 2 or 3 times a night. And the stress level and the tension level is quite high. It's quite high. Sima called me and she says she has to come home. Figure out. She's telling me, and they tried to go. Girls tried to go through Jordan, and girls from seminary trying to go through Egypt and Cyprus. Anyhow, So I told her, essentially, what do I say? Be compassionate, understand, it's very stressful, it's a lot of tension. But may ayin basa, from where do you come? And where are you going? What's the long story? What's the big story? What's the whole story? What's the soul story? We're going, yes, this moment is a difficult moment, but we're going to look back at this moment in the context of from where did you come? How many thousands of years of Jewish history are contained in this moment? Where are you going? How much of the future is predicated on this moment? And to whom, before whom will you give an accounting? How, to whom is this significant? To Hashem himself. So we can't lose sight of the big picture. And she was very stressed, and I was trying to explain to her this idea of really seeing yourself in the context of Jewish history and the context of everything, and the importance of this moment, and the importance of understanding that this has to go on for as long as it needs to go on. And she was very, very stressed. But then a few hours later, she says she's feeling much, much better. And she went out this morning and she went to the toy store and she bought a bunch of toys and she's giving them out to, I told her, I said, buy toys. I'll get people from Portland who want to contribute. So if you want, you can be a part of the effort. She's giving toys out to the kids in the shelters now, and she's dancing and she's relieving mothers and giving them breaks from their children when they have time, so that they can all take a break. There's no schools over there. But Baruch Hashem, she's doing a lot better, and Hashem will protect her and everybody. I share with you this story because we have to see, how do we not come to the course of sin? So the first thing he says is, know from where you came. Where are you going, and before whom you're destined to give a judgment and account. And that could be enough. That could be enough. But then that speaks to the soul. That speaks to the soul. But the body still has pride. The body still has lust. The body still has something inside the body that says, just really doesn't make a difference. I can't make a difference. I don't really matter. And now he talks to the body and he says, from where did you come? From a putrid drop, you stinking body. You have nothing to be proud of. You cannot become proud of anything. Others explain that not only is the putrid drop a reference to the fact that the body simply, you were created essentially under very unseemingly circumstances. You can't be so great. The body cannot be so great. Others say, other commentators also explain, just remember where you came from. Remember that the body is formed under very lustful circumstances, under very pleasure-seeking circumstances, and therefore be aware and understand that the body itself is not only should it be humble, but it should also understand that it has that it will look out, that it will try to seek pleasure. Understand that. And then he says, where are you going to? Where's the body going to? It's going to a place of dust, maggots, and worms. And before whom are you destined to give a judgment and accounting? Before the supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be. Ultimately, remember there is accountability. There is responsibility. So we speak to the person on the soul level, and we speak to the person on the body level. And the Rebbe actually takes it even a step further, and he says, and the beginning of the Mishnah, he says, reflect upon three things, and you will not come to the hands of transgression. He says, simply reflect on the number three. That's talking to a person on their most essential level. Reflect on the number three. Reflect on the idea that there is the person, there is you, there is the Jew, there is the Creator, and there is the world that you're given to perfect. There is you, Hashem, and the world that's here for us to perfect. Reflect on the number three. And you won't even start coming to a loss of sense of self. You won't start to be taken over with pride. Reflect on the fact that this is a relation between you, God, and the third dimension is that the whole world is here for us to perfect. So we have to know how great our souls are. We have to understand how silly and how insignificant pride, lust, and a loss of a sense of accountability are. And this is what the great Akavya Mahalalel, the man of great integrity, the man who would not allow his name who would not allow his own sense of of fame or his own future. He wouldn't allow that to cloud his commitment to integrity. The man who understood and told his son, it's going to be your actions that are going to make a difference, and your life and your decisions. This is the great teachings that he taught us 2,100 some years ago, and here we are tonight. The blessing of the teachings of Akavya. So thank you for joining me for this very, very special Mishnah. And I just want to say that when I laid out this course, I said, though, this year we're going to do chapter 3. So we would have to do, to get through the whole chapter, we'd have to do about 3 Mishnayos a week to get through the whole thing. But this one was too good. I said, this one's going to take a whole week. So thank you. Thank you. Questions, comments, thoughts?